Before we get into the real meat of this issue about negative body image and how the media affects women, we got to discuss the other two theories that we're not going to be using today, as we are going to be using symbolic interactionism. The first theory is functionalism. And essentially, functionalist theory says everything is connected together, and out of this interconnectedness, we maintain a state of balance. Talcott Parsons even proposed that society has four basic prerequisites: adaptation, goal attainment, integration, and pattern maintenance. And all of these need to function perfectly in order to solve all the problems of society, in order for society to survive. For the purpose of this paper, we really can't use functionalism, since that would imply that all the body image issues that women have are part of this grand scheme for society to function. In fact, I think you would be hard pressed to find any doctor who would say that anorexia, bulimia, teen suicide, preteen smoking, preteen drinking, or any of the other issues that come along with it would be part of this grand scheme and that the society functions better because of it. So, because of that, we won't be using functionalism. The second theory we won't be using today is conflict theory, or conflict/feminist theory. And the reason we won't be using it is based off their principles of power, and that the power deals privilege, and that the people in power need to feel superior. In order to feel superior, they put out ideologies to justify their position, and to maintain their position in society, the powerful use social institutions, um, politics, police, different aspects of business. But why this can't be used here, even though it is feminist theory and this is a feminist issue as far as body image is concerned, is because this also would imply that men have created magazines, TV, everything on the internet in order to completely subjugate women. So when you see the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, it's really a man's plot to keep women subjugated. That all the negative consequences are just this grand scheme of this conflict theory. So again, we really wouldn't be able to find evidence on that showing it, and all the evidence would be extremely biased. We'd have to go to a lot of National Organization of Women sources, and plus we'd probably have to go even further left to prove that. So we really want to keep an unbiased paper, this project, as unbiased as possible. So for those reasons, we won't be using feminist or conflict theory today. Finally, we get to symbolic interactionism. And Hensland defines symbolic interactionism as the essence of this perspective is that we see the world through symbols, things to which we attach meaning, and that we use to communicate with one another. In short, symbolic interaction theory is when a society places symbolic value on certain items. In this case, body image. Society has placed symbolic significance on certain body type or a certain look. And this is going to be the perfect theory that we need, because negative body image has a lot to do with how women perceive themselves in relationship to what the media says is beautiful. And this is throughout the history of media, when in particular from about the 1920s on up with magazines, and again, advent of television and movie theaters, mainstream, when everyone started having this visual, this picture of the perfect woman was there, and women have strived to attain this almost unattainable goal. So symbolic interactionism has to be used, just simply because it is all about what we see and the meaning we attach to it. So for the rest of this paper, we're going to be focusing on symbolic interactionism, and we are going to be explaining all the root causes, well, most of the root causes, and we're going to try and show how symbolic interactionism is used as a theory to explain why the media has a negative impact on female body image. Now that we've discussed the theoretical approaches, we actually want to discuss the problem of the media and its influence on body image, as far as the negative impact it has on women. So before we start, what we really want to do is kind of get a visual of what was going on in the 1940s and 1950s that set the precedent for women having these body image issues. We could go to the 80s and we could go to the 90s, but that's obvious, and we really have to start where media kicks in and takes over this whole essentially operation of why they are imperfect and what they can do to improve on their imperfections. So what we're going to see are 5 commercials having to do with dieting for the most part, the early Barbie commercials, and a couple to do with makeup and hair, just to show how once television came out, it really did lay down the roots for this mass societal problem that we have.
Barbie, you're beautiful. You make me feel my Barbie doll is really real. Barbie's small and so petite. Her clothes and figure look so neat. Her dancing outfit rings the bell. At parties she will cast a spell. Purses, hats, and gloves galore. And all the gadgets gals adore.
Barbie dressed for swimmin' fun is only $3. Her lovely fashions range from $1 to $5. Look for Barbie wherever dolls are sold.
Someday I'm gonna be exactly like you. Till then I know just what I'll do. Barbie, beautiful Barbie, I'll make believe that I am you.
You can tell it's Mattel. It's swell.
What's the best way to reduce? Eat what you want or starve yourself? Leaving the table with a full stomach or an empty one? Empty stomach? Wrong. A half-empty stomach causes hunger tantrums, makes you nibble between meals, probably stuff yourself at your next meal. That's why rigid starvation diets are not only dangerous, but usually don't work. Now, with the RDX plan, you fill your stomach, avoid hunger tantrums, lose weight naturally and fast. The RDX plan includes a scientific, clinically tested formula that helps you cut down your craving for fattening foods, while you fill your stomach with what you need, suffer no hunger tantrums. You lose as many pounds as you wish, or money back. And new, pleasant-tasting RDX tablets are safe, contain no dangerous drugs, no hormones. So lose ugly fat fast with RDX Full Stomach Reducing Plan. Get RDX at your drugstore today.
You know, this was me 5 years ago, and it's still me. Because I confess I'm a waistline watcher from way back. Well, that's enough for today. Now for a lively lift. Ice-cold Coca-Cola. There's no waistline worry with Coke, you know. Actually, this individual-sized bottle has no more calories than half a grapefruit. Another thing, the cold, crisp taste of Coke is so satisfying, it keeps me from eating something else that might really add those pounds. Coke's a natural, wholesome blending of pure food flavors. I guess that's why everyone likes the refreshing new feeling you get, only from not-too-sweet Coca-Cola. And no wonder. Lively, lifty Coca-Cola provides a welcome bit of quick energy between meals. Makes for a pleasant pause in a busy day. Oh, and remember, Coke is low in calories, too. Say, now, don't you get any thinner.
It's top secret, Carol.
Top secret, eh, boy?
Definitely. Top secret.
Yes, it's Max Factor's Top Secret that keeps her hair so neat all day. Just arrange your hair the way you like it. Spray with Top Secret, and your hair is held gently and softly in place all day. No wispy ends, no straggly curls. Wherever you go, whatever you do, your hair looks immaculate, even on breezy days, even on damp days. And for a very special hairdo for a sudden date, pin up, spray, comb out. Of course, Max Factor's Top Secret is wonderful for bedtime pin-ups, too. Use Top Secret by Max Factor to keep your hair always perfectly in place, soft and lustrous too, because Top Secret contains lanolin. Top Secret by Max Factor.
Nice party for blondes. Picture-perfect blondes, that is. Sally wasn't picture-perfect till I came along. Then she used picture-perfect to renew faded color, tone down brassiness. Are you the blonde you became a blonde to be? After each shampoo, simply rinse on Clairol's Picture Perfect.
When we look at all the images out there on how women are supposed to act and how women are supposed to look like, we can look to the 1950s and see that the Coca-Cola commercials, the Clairol commercials, every other commercial out there, along with the starlets on the movie screen, along with images they see in advertising back in the day, were that women were supposed to look and act a certain way. And this sets up a negative body issue because young girls especially, but also housewives, single women, they need to obtain that brass ring that's almost not achievable. But what happens is over time that it becomes systemic in society because we look at the social narrative and society says this is what you're supposed to look like. All the images say this is what you're supposed to look like. And this transcends out into modern day where you get problems such as listed in the National Eating Disorder Association report, which show that Americans in general, 13 million binge eat, 10 million women battle anorexia or bulimia. Out of a body size issue of a normal woman who's 5'4" and 140 pounds, they're looking up to a fashion model who's 5'11" and 110 pounds. So just on a height-weight ratio, it's impossible for this 5'4" woman to look like a supermodel. If you're going to go proportion-wise, she would need to weigh the equivalent of 80 or 90 pounds to achieve what these supermodels, the height-weight ratio they have. This is a major problem because this sets up the negative body issue because they look at this, they look at the supermodels, they look at the actresses, and if they're going for that standard of beauty, then it's impossible for them to attain that. If you look at the recent Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, there's a woman on there who's a quote-unquote plus-size model, but she's 5'11" and 180 pounds. Well, the problem with that is that she's a fit 5'11". So any woman who's under 5'11", they look at her and say, wow, this is how I'm supposed to look, even on plus size. And even that's not really obtainable since there are genetic factors that play into it. There are just simple lifestyle choices, wealth plays into it. But there's this gold standard that sits up there that women have to obtain. And so when women look to these images, they're reaching for a standard they can't attain. This is proved through the same report where you look at the dieting industry, which makes $40 billion a year, which is the equivalent of 400 million monthly Weight Watchers passes or 570 million boxes of Ally. So weight loss is a money-making business, and they're profiting off these negative images. By simply putting an advertisement out there, a woman could sit there and say, if I can take a pill, I can look like that woman on TV. And for whatever reason, whether that's a confidence issue, whether that's a dating issue, this lends to the situation of continuing the negative body image because they will never be able to achieve that goal. If you look at the eating disorder hospitalizations, you look at 119% increase among children under 12 years old. This figure is highly disturbing because what this means is that even young girls have such a bad negative body image of themselves that they're willing to go to extreme measures to achieve a goal that they really don't need to achieve since they're preteens. Their bodies are going to grow, their bodies are going to change, but they're looking to this unattainable standard that's been set before them. If you look at the same report, children, 80% of all 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat. 42% of first through third grade girls want to be thinner. This is not an issue that little girls should be worrying about. Yet, because of the images that are portrayed on even Disney, even movies, all these different shows, all these different commercials, all these different types of media say you need to be thin. If you look to any show that's on television now, and in the past, the comic relief was always the quote unquote the fat kid. The pretty girls always got the boys. They had pretty girl problems. The bigger girls were always there to get a laugh. And if you don't want to be laughed at, you have to be thin. So a lot of the media out there pushes out that fat doesn't equal success. And when you apply that to young girls and you keep that going on to when they're teenagers, when they're young women, when they're young ladies, and going on and on and on, there's this systemic cycle of needing to keep improving on oneself, or quote unquote improving on oneself. But as the report shows, this is just a never ending cycle, and for every negative body image that comes out, there's an industry there that is willing to quote unquote take care of you to help you achieve this goal. So this is one of the major problems coming out of media and the negative impact it has on young girls. And like I said, as we can see from the report, this perpetuates a problem that seemingly has no end as long as there is a type of media. Now, it's at this point when we can look to the symbolic interaction theory to help us define this problem even more, because we do need a basis to understand everything, considering that the symbolic interaction theory would say we have placed value on the body. Now, Anthony Sinat in the Body Social, 1993, states that the body social is many things, the prime symbol of the self, but also the society. It is something we have, yet also what we are. It is both subject and object at the same time. It is individual and personal, as unique as a fingerprint or order plume, yet it is common to all humanity. The body is both an individual creation, physically and phenomenologically, and the cultural product. It is personal and also state property. This is a massive concept to understand in terms of sociology, because what this is telling us is that your body, while it is yours and you do have individual experience, your body also belongs to the collective. And that makes life interesting as far as body image goes, negative body image, because really, according to this theory, your body is not your own. So as far as having a symbolic interaction, or symbolic interactionism in this case, the society has applied a standard, a value. They have said beauty is X. And in order to achieve X, it's essentially a mathematical problem. You have to achieve this standard. This is why we have a body mass index to say what is healthy, and achieving this BMI. To achieve this BMI, you need to lose X weight, gain X amount of weight, fit into this size jeans. And so everything is built around there. Everything in the media, this standard of beauty, is built into the media, into one giant visual, which this country has become, and that's just a product of evolution and a technological evolution, to be more specific. But what we need to understand in symbolic interactionism is that this theory that the body does not really belong to you plays into everything. And this is the problem going from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and on up, when women are told this is it, this is the standard. To understand this concept even more, we can look to ads such as Lane Bryant, from Lane Bryant, which has been around since the 1940s and 50s, and advertised as quote-unquote plump women. Now, if you look in their advertising, there really is nothing wrong with the women. They are normal-looking women, I would say thin by today's standards, but compared to the BMI, compared to the images that are put out by the media, there was a whole line of clothing built for these quote-unquote overweight women so they can attain substandard of beauty. If you look to the Clairol ad before, men love blondes, so you should be a blonde because blondes have more fun. This is the essence of Clairol. Why dye your hair so you can have a good time, so you'll be socially accepted. If you look to the Coca-Cola ad, drink Coca-Cola. It'll make you thin because it will fill you up. It doesn't have any calories like all those other things you would eat during the day, and if you fill up on that, you won't need to eat more, and you'll stay nice and thin. And this goes back into the future because you could look at ads for drinks such like Tab and Diet Pepsi, and all these ads are telling women, don't fill up on calories. You can fill up, but you won't fill up on calories because you need to maintain your standard of beauty that society wants you to have, that the body of society wants you to have, and that everyone will appreciate, regardless of whether you're an individual or not. And if you look at all these messages that are being sent out, there are more negative body image messages that are being sent than positive issues that are being sent. You could probably count on one hand all the images you've ever seen in your life that say it's okay to be who you are, with the exception of Sesame Street when you're a little kid and some of the other children's programming. As you get to be a preteen, the image of anyone overweight, anyone who's exceptionally short, anyone with braces, anyone who's poor, it all goes out the window. You could even look to television now and see how the portrayal of women on TV, and now and in the past, has essentially remained consistent, even though the gender roles are different. 1950s, there was a housewife, but the housewife was beautiful, and she served her role, and she was always immaculate, and she was always well groomed. And then you could fast forward to 1990s, 2000s, where if you look at the men are allowed to be slobs, the men are allowed to be overweight, the men are allowed to make mistakes in their life and do everything they want, to have heart attacks, to smoke, to drink, and that's acceptable because they're a man, and the men don't have the same body image issues that women do. And then you look to the woman who has to keep herself fit all the time. And it's really not until recently, like shows like Roseanne and Mike and Molly, where there is an overweight lead female character who can say, hey, it's okay to be bigger. But even that, they are the comic relief in this situation. So the problem is, again, systemic. And if you look to symbolic interactionism as a basis for this, it'll show you, it'll prove that through society, that society has put this label on and it's not willing to diverge from that label for anything. And that even though the individual, we tell people to be individual, to be yourself, really at the end of the day, your individuality is more for yourself than anything else. But if you want to step out into the world, you need to conform to society or almost expect the repercussions. Even though the repercussions aren't warranted, you're almost expected to be chastised openly, to be told where you can shop, what you can do. And the images on TV, the images in the media essentially reinforce all these negative body issues, and even to the extent of saying we can give you surgery to correct your issues because, hey, you haven't bought the product, well, here's another product to buy now, just so you can be beautiful according to what society says, because we have set that standard. Again, symbolic interactionism. We're sitting there saying we have assigned value, and because of that, women will always have this problem, and no matter what gets done to it, as we look toward the social issue later on, we'll see that no matter what fight has been put up, we're not any closer to achieving solvency than we were, say, 20 years ago. We've started, but it's difficult to change what the symbols that have been assigned to society for decades upon decades upon decades. It's difficult to change those in the minds of all the people to conform to this image that women have value and therefore we should individual value, and therefore we should eliminate the negative body issue type in media. One of the other key issues we need to discuss is false information or misconceptions concerning negative body image and the media. Now, what this means is that there are people out there who would say that negative body image has nothing to do with the media, or very little to do with the media. And actually, it's driven by genetics, it's driven by peer groups, it's driven by all the other sociological issues and subgroups, but it's not driven by the media, and the media really has a very small part in it. However, if we look at studies such as the one done at Texas A&M in 2013, we can see that yes, their focus is on these groups of people, and they say yes, they are influenced by their friends, but the study also finds that their friends a lot of times are not really friends in the traditional sense of the word, where they go out on the weekends, they go over for sleepovers. They're friends as they view them on Facebook, social media. So there's always a constant comparison, and what people tend to forget is that even social media is still media. And therefore, all images put out, all the pictures put out, everything there is an influencing factor. The second thing studies tend to ignore, that when they dismiss the media as a potential cause, is that teenagers, young adults, preteens, and most young women, they aren't the trendsetters. Yes, within their peer group, they may be the trendsetters, but generally they get their ideas, they get their fashions from Hollywood stars, from music videos, from magazines. They look to the media to influence them. They look to other adults who are influenced by the trendsetters to influence them. So when someone just says, "Oh, a teen isn't influenced by the media, it's just influenced by their peers," well, who are their peers influenced by? It's really a trickle-down effect. And if you just simply say, "Well, your cause of your disease is not caused by the media, obviously, because your friend had bulimia, so therefore you thought that was a great way to lose weight," or control your appetite, so therefore you just copied her, and it had nothing to do with the media. But the influence of the media extends out. Its sphere of influence goes from one person to another person to another person, just like the plague. So to write it off simply as like there is no influence or the influence is minimal is complete false information. Another form of false information are the Dove campaign commercials, or Sports Illustrated, where they try and go, well, we have plus size models, and what they try to do is they redefine plus size as a size 12 or a size 10, and they say, look what we're doing for society. And he goes, this is an attainable goal. But really, those women aren't plus size, because again, a lot of those models are taller, they're genetically bigger, but they're not big, they're not overweight, they're not obese, they're just bigger by comparison. They're big bone. If you take someone who's 6'1", obviously they wear a bigger pant size, if they have any kind of hips, than someone who's 5'2". But again, this is one of those things that the media, that people put into account, that say, well, it's not a media factor. Look what we're doing. We're disproving this. We're helping cure for negative body image. So obviously we're doing our part, so it's not the media's fault. So again, there's a lot of false information out there, a lot of misconceptions, and generally it goes back to symbolic interactionism, where it's the society that sets the standard, and if you have a visual there that says, and just like the Dove ad, well, this is the new plus size, when clearly that plus size is not plus size, it doesn't matter, because society has already accepted that quote-unquote plus size as that's the new standard of beauty. That's real beauty, even though it's still a model at the end of the day. In any case, you could see that through symbolic interactionism, how this false information plays into the hands of the media conglomerates itself to kind of just blow it off as we're not the problem. Our final little bit of problem areas that we have to discuss have to deal with two issues that aren't generally discussed in the discourse we have about body image, negative body image, and how the media affects it. And the first one is that this is not just a United States-based issue. This is an international issue. If you can look to countries like China, to England, to Greece, to India, all over the world, there are negative body image issues. For example, we look to the USA and they say there's about 1%, almost a little less than 1% of all the women in the United States suffer from anorexia nervosa, which is quite a bit. But then you look to Greece, and Greece has about almost the same amount of people, about 0.7% of women suffer from the same disease. And this includes urban and rural. So where does this come from? If this is not just a U.S. issue, this is women all around the world who are being affected by media images and how they're portrayed, and that you have to be beautiful. If you look to Southern Australia, they also have a high percentage. Now you go, okay, well, it's 0.2% of a population, but if your country has 100 million people in it, that's quite a bit of the population. I mean, just at 1%, you'd be sitting at 1 million people. So when you're talking about 200 to 250,000 people in a country with anorexia nervosa, that's quite a bit. But then you also look to bulimia too, bulimia nervosa, and you would think that the United States, with all its issues, has the most people with it. But it really is the United Kingdom, in particular South Asians in the United Kingdom. We're talking Indians, we're talking people from ex-colonial areas, and what we have to look at is that they have a percentage of the women, we're talking about 3.5% of South Asian British women have bulimia. And this is a huge number, considering that the United States has 2% of its population with bulimia, so they're almost doubled our rate with less people in their country. And this is an outstanding number. This is an outstanding amount. This is, well, not outstanding in the good sense, but it's really disturbing. If you look to other countries, Egypt has quite a few. They have 1.5% of its population have suffered from bulimia. Same thing with China. Same thing with the United Kingdom with its white population. Same thing with the Italians. So if you look up and down the line, eating disorders are global. It's a global issue, and to simply under the false information says to say blow it off as like there is no correlation between the media. Well, that's very U.S. U.S. centered approach to everything, where we're just blowing it off. It's like it's not our fault. Well, if the whole world is having an issue with it, there should be something with it. Now, granted, there are people who say, well, there's genetics. There's a lot of different things in store here. But with the media presence the way things are, the way social media has stretched out, these cases have jumped up over the past 10, 20, 30 years. Some of the times 10 to 20 times the amount of past cases. A lot of this does have to do with the media, but I think just to dismiss it as a U.S. issue is a complete falsehood, because this is happening around the world, and it's not just bulimia and anorexia. There are the same girls who have the same problems as American girls do in Taiwan, in Tel Aviv, in Kurdistan, in Algiers, in South Africa, in Peru. This is a worldwide. This is a worldwide issue. And so if we kind of concentrate on that and say, what can we do as far as making this a global issue, perhaps there can be some kind of resolution. That's for another time, though. But I just wanted to expand on that and say that, yes, people forget that this is a global issue, and media, being a global entity, has its sphere of influence in the entire internet community. So, which is, for all intents and purposes, the entire world. So you can definitely see some sort of a correlation. The other thing that it doesn't take into account when it's being dismissive is the actual eating disorders themselves. And the eating disorders we talked about anorexia, we talked about bulimia, we talked about depression. Depression is amazing. You can't just discount depression. You can't just say, well, they're having a bad day. Oh, they're being picked on. They're being bullied. Yes, that's a part of the issue. But when you look at the problem, a lot of times when people blow it off, when people have these misconceptions and say, well, it's not our fault, they're forgetting that there are little things every day. If someone say, it's not just the media saying you're ugly, it's the media saying what your style is old, that if you're poor, you have a bad body image of yourself. Even if you wear the types of clothes, if they say that those clothes are emblematic now of someone who is quote unquote maybe ghetto, or maybe has or you could tell, or associated with drug dealers, gangs, that could also lead to negative body image too, because sometimes poor people don't necessarily have a choice in the clothes they wear. But what we do is, again, those are the images coming off the media. So we're told that we should be careful with what we say as individuals. Don't insult people. Be careful of other people's races, creeds, cultures, sexual orientations, and whatnot. But essentially, the media is the only type of, for lack of a better word, medium, where people can say pretty much what they want with reckless abandon, as long as it's not tailored to a whole group of people and it's just a general statement. They can do what they want and hurt who they want, and then play it off as like, well, it's not really their fault. There must have been something else. So you see, they were depressed. They had pre-existing condition. But again, that's a fallacy, and that is, again, a sort of false information, is to just play off these diseases that this is something that was there before. It's not our fault. And so I think that's important to mention in the big picture, because when we get into society and how we've tried to resolve these issues, especially in the next section, we're going to see how that symbolic interactionism, that symbol, that visual that is always out there, doesn't lend to solving the problem. It actually hurts the problem, since, again, we are a visual society. We live in a technological age, and now we're in a global age of technology, so we can extend all our problems, what used to be just what we thought were first world problems, to everyone in the world. But we'll discuss that as we move on. In discussing personification, there are a couple case studies that Sierra could have looked at over the course of since the 1950s on up to present. Oprah Winfrey being one, her struggles with weight, the model Gia and her struggles with weight, and numerous women, Karen Carpenter, across the board. There are plenty of case studies of women who struggled with weight in terms of symbolic interactionism and the symbolic interaction theory. However, the best choice for this example is my mother, Sierra's mother-in-law, Toby Hanft, and her struggles with weight, with image, and how that relates all back to the social interaction theory, not social interaction, symbolic interaction theory. When we looked at her as far as symbolic interactionism, we discovered that her whole life was based off of this chase of the perfect body image. This started when she was younger, when she was 7 or 8. She was a fairly skinny child, and she was told to eat, eat, eat. And this was normal because you didn't want your child to go hungry, so she was given ice cream and milk. But over her life, she was always told that even though she was skinny, she was fat, because the family members looked up to standards of beauty her whole life. Now, I've met these family members, so I can vouch for the older family members who always had this idea of what perfect beauty should be, the perfect size, what you need to be, what type of dress you needed to have. So my mother, for her whole life, in a family full of women, was always judged according to standards of beauty. And therefore, no matter what she did, she could never escape that. So as she grew as a teenager, as she grew as an adult, she was essentially, and for a lack of a better phrase, a slave to fashion and a slave to the industry. And her whole goal was to stay skinny, because even though she was skinny, she was never skinny enough for the family. So she went her whole life dyeing her hair bleach blonde, even though she was already a blonde. She took diet pills constantly. She made sure that if there was a surgery to get that extra part of her neck, the little skin on her neck taken off, she got that taken care of. She had breast augmentation when her breasts were too big, and she went down to a smaller size to meet a standard. And this was in the days when the standards of beauty, they were getting away for the larger chested women and going down to a smaller size, since that was since that was the standard of beauty. She was always in fashion, but that was also at the expense of her children, which was me and my brothers. Well, we had, but we didn't always have the best things. In fact, I remember wearing sweatpants for the better part of 3 years while my mother went out and got the newest jeans, the newest designer jeans, the newest designer clothes, the newest makeup. She went to the salon once every 2 weeks, and it was always this chase of beauty, because that was the standard that was there. And whatever new star was there, that's what happened. If a new artist, a new musician, a new model came out with a new hairstyle, she was one of the first people to get that new hairstyle. And a lot of that had to go back to her own life and her looking for acceptance, looking for love. But on top of that, her quest for love was related directly to how women looked and what men wanted. So she was constantly seeking acceptance from men through the images in the media. So when I look at that whole situation in symbolic interactionism, I can clearly see that theory that she essentially belonged to the collective, even though she was an individual, greatly affected her, made her life a constant hell. And up until a couple of years before she passed away, her goal for the better part of 50 years was to remain beautiful in the societal context. And therefore, if you're looking for a personalization aspect of it, you can usually look to your own families, and you can always find that one person who always has to be the first person to do something, always has to be the person who has the greatest fashion statement, who has the newest clothes, who has the newest perfume, who spends money, unnecessary amounts of money, just to be in fashion for an unknown reason. And while everyone looks at them and goes, "Why do you need to do that? You're beautiful already," they're trying to attain a standard of beauty that society says is the perfect standard of beauty. And that chase, it's kind of like a heroin addict, where it's called chasing the dragon. You can never catch the dragon, because my mother was 5'2". She was never going to be supermodel thin or supermodel tall, but in her mind, she always wanted to achieve that goal. And therefore, we can see through symbolic interactionism theory that my mother was directly impacted by the media and how the media portrayed women in society.
And in just a few short minutes from now, ladies and gentlemen, we will know the name of our new Miss America.
Yes, sirree, boys, step right up. How much am I offered for this #1 piece of prime American property? She sings in the kitchen, hums at the typewriter, purrs in bed. She walks, she talks, she even whips. And thanks to the research of Tony and Revlon, you can get this standard quality model wherever you go. The perfect model. She doesn't talk back. In fact, she doesn't talk at all unless you want her to. And then she only says what you're programmed her to say. Yes, sir, you can use her to push your product, push your politics, or push your war. She's the girl back home every man is fighting for.
In assessing the 4 stages of social problems, obviously we need to start at stage 1, which is the beginning. As you can see from the video, this is from the 1968 protest outside the Miss America pageant, and this was when the National Organization of Women essentially went out and said to mainstream America that we are not going to accept this image that men are putting out and the establishment is putting out about women and how women are supposed to look. Basically, body image started to become recognized as a social problem with the emergence of the women's liberation movement in the early 1960s and with the publication of The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan in 1963. Women were starting to voice their opinions about several women's issues, and really there was a consciousness about the whole women's liberation movement and how women were portrayed up until that point. With the foundation of the National Organization of Women, or NOW, and the Red Stockings, many women started to emerge and stand up against the objectification of women. And in 1968, they went out to the Miss America pageant in Atlantic City, and it was really one of the first times that there was an actual protest against the promotion of poor body image, and they just told women that you do not have to be just another pretty face. So this is the very beginning of the 4 stages, and it launched off a whole new feminist ideology that took America by storm. Next we come to stage 2, which is the official response, and while we don't have a whole lot of pretty pictures or videos on this, in general, the women's movement have met with great resistance from both sides, both men and women. From the men's side, they viewed it as an attack on traditional America, much like you see in a lot of issues today, but it was an attack on traditional America, and why don't we celebrate beauty, and this Miss America, traditional as apple pie, what was the reasoning behind it? Men didn't understand, and of course they wouldn't understand because obviously they're men, for the most part in traditional 1960s America. Then you get over to the women's side of it, who actually resisted even more than the men, simply because they felt that this was an attack on their way of life. You had a lot of mid-American women, conservative women, even the Democratic women in Congress were still fairly conservative when it came to women's roles, and they felt the National Organization of Women and groups like it were pushing an issue that didn't need to be pushed. They were trying to redefine gender roles that didn't need to be refined. So in this way, the response to the National Organization of Women, the Red Stockings, and the other groups, it was, needless to say, it was blunt, it was to the point, and it was that we don't want this. Even to the extent when the Equal Rights Amendment was going up, Congress people were saying this probably shouldn't be passed because the law restricts women from having traditional marriages and that it would destroy society. So in this case there was an official response, and the response back was, the pushback on that was that the National Organization of Women ramped up their efforts and especially focused on the Equal Rights Amendment. So while some became more militant, the general focus was that there would be equal rights for women. So in essence, body image issue itself and objectification of women kind of came to a screeching halt at this point. But we'll get into that in stage 3. Reaction to the official response is interesting at stage 3 because essentially the official response to women's body issue in any case was that the organization was willing to drop that issue in favor of the larger issues as far as equality for women, and so it came under this giant umbrella. So what had happened there was when the ERA amendment was defeated in the early 80s, essentially that whole any cause that was under that umbrella went out on its own separate way. Now, one of the biggest issues was abortion at the time, and that was Roe versus Wade, and that was seen as a massive, massive gain for women as far as their rights. And so, in essence, the response to ERA separated out major issues such as abortion, equal pay, and what they considered minor issues such as women, body image, negative body image, and how men portray them. Going back to the 1968 protest of the Miss America pageant, that essentially got put on the back burner. So the reaction to the official response was both positive for women in a lot of ways, but in terms of the issue we'll be discussing, was highly negative just because it was disregarded as a minor issue. Finally, we get to stage 4. And stage 4 is an interesting hybrid of stage 3 and stage 4, because what we see is as the feminist movement geared more toward equal rights for women, again, as we stated in stage 3, such as abortion, such as equal pay, when they put body image on the back burner, what happened was we saw the rise of the supermodel. Women like Jerry Hall, Gia, Janice Dickinson. You saw other women in film, just sex symbols all around. And they became the new standard of what sexy is in fashion magazines. Now, the women's liberation movement may have tried to just simply say, well, we're just not going to take part in the fashion industry. But if that was their alternative strategy, that was an alternative strategy that they basically already accepted once they stopped discussing the issue of body image and how women were portrayed. Their alternative strategies actually were not to have an alternative strategy. In the meantime, the women that would take the forefront of the alternative strategies were not necessarily what you would call the hardcore feminists, because those women kind of just went along their way with dealing with the equal rights. But what would happen is you would get women like Oprah Winfrey coming out and saying that yes, women need to have positive body image. She discussed her own weight struggles. She discussed things in her life that caused her to go up and down. And it's at this point in the 80s and 90s that women start to look at themselves again as individually instead of as this collective. And one of the alternative strategies was to use famous people to essentially say, ladies, you don't need to look like this. You're beautiful who you are. Now, obviously, this went against the grain, but when you have Maria Shriver, who is in essence a Kennedy, you have Oprah Winfrey, you have the Dove Real Beauty ads. These are the alternative strategies. These are the new strategies in opposition to the Now movement, which was more militant in nature, more political. They're realizing that the best way to reach young people, young women in particular, is to use their stardom, is to use their fame in order to send a positive message and act as a role model to these young women that they don't need to have a negative body image. And basically, this is the end of stage 4, because the alternative strategies have proven to work better than the actual organized movements geared towards specific women's issues. Like I said, the minor issues such as body image and other things, just because of the star appeal. So now we come to the question, how do we solve for negative body issue in young women, in teenagers, in women in general? And we have to do this in context of the social interaction theory. And what we can find is this, is that the easiest way to solve for this is not through some grand scheme of making laws or having simple protest, but what it comes down to is changing the societal narrative. Because everybody's individual experience is completely different, but compared to the societal narrative, that individual experience tends to get overlooked. You look at instances with Oprah Winfrey when she realized that she couldn't stand next to these famous singers on stage because of her weight. My wife had eating disorder issues when she was younger because there was always this pressure to look a certain way, to be a certain way. And you look throughout history, especially in the past 100 years, and there has always been this drive for people to put on other people to say, you need to look a certain way. This is what the ideal fit person is. And that's because in social interaction theory, we've applied a symbol of what a good-looking person is, whether that's Marilyn Monroe, whether that's Jessica Alba. If you look at men, they look to the pornography industry and they say, this is what a beautiful woman is supposed to look like. Why don't you look like her? They look at models. They look at people on TV. They watch the internet. They see everything out there and they say, women, you need to look like this. And in turn, women also look at these other women and say, this is what men find attractive. This is what society deems as beautiful. Therefore, I need to look like that. And that is part of the social narrative, because as a society, we have accepted the fact that these women who are on TV, who are a very small representation of the general population, they are the symbol. They are the status symbol. They are the goal that everyone has to obtain. And this contradicts everything in individual experience that we know. Most people, whether you're talking about negative body image, whether you're talking about being wealthy, anything, most people will never achieve that ultimate goal. If you look at American Idol, there are very few people in this world that can sing like American Idol, yet we hold this great standard of, yes, that's the best in singing, I need to sing like that. If I can't sing like that, then I shouldn't be singing. If you talk about modeling, you look at Tyra Banks, you look at Christy Brinkley, Cindy Crawford, you can go down the line, and that is the image that wants to be put off. And that's what society deems as normal, as fit, as what a real woman should look like. Now, there have been campaigns to say real women have curves, women should be themselves, you're beautiful on the inside and the outside. At the beginning of this presentation, we heard Megan Trainor's All About That Bass, talking about it's okay to be yourself, it's okay to be big, sometimes that's the way God made you. But in reality, as long as the social narrative remains the same, and that beauty is not just in the eye of the beholder, beauty's in the eye of the society, and a woman must act a certain way, must look a certain way in order to be considered beautiful, women will continue to have these negative body issues. Now, the solution to this is to keep going at it with not just people who are famous, but to start earlier, to start from when children are 1, 2, 3, not just telling them that they're beautiful, because that's a big part of it, but establishing that they are who they are. And for parents to take responsibility is a major step in changing the social narrative. Because as those children grow older, their experiences won't be shaped around what they're supposed to be, but they'll be shaped around who they are as people. Now, society will always interfere, and they will always say, you need to look like this. Whether that's to get a job, whether that's to get a man, whether your hair has to be a certain way, whether your eye color has to be a certain way, whether you're supposed to dress a certain way, and if you don't do this, you won't be successful, and there will always be your peer pressures. But the way to solve this is to start early, to keep going often, and then to keep working at it over time, and as the generations pass, then hopefully this issue of what a person is supposed to be like and the symbolic actionism that's placed upon it, whereas we've made something into a symbol that represents our whole society, well, maybe that will change as well. But until that happens, we are always going to have the same issues that we have today. And this isn't just a U.S. issue. This is a global issue. In China, there are symbols of beauty. In Iran, there are symbols of beauty. India, there are symbols of beauty. You can look at any of the Bollywood movies. You can look at any of the videos coming out of there. And the women are fairly stock women. They have the same look, the same proportions. You rarely see a larger woman on those Bollywood videos, whether the movies or the music videos. You go to China, there's a way people are supposed to look. You go to anywhere in the world and the same problem exists, because women are played upon for their whole lives that you need to act and be a certain way. So therefore, solvency in essence will never really be achieved 100%. Because as long as society has a standard that they can look to, where a majority can say this is beauty, this is what it's supposed to be, then nothing will already happen. So the battle is really one step at a time. And for every girl that we can convince that she's beautiful, maybe she'll convince two more, and maybe she'll convince two more, and over time things will change. But through a symbolic interaction theory, we can see that it is perception, and perception is reality.